Welcome to Culture on I-24 News. Today on the show, we'll talk to actress Inbar Lavi about conquering Hollywood. And plunge into philosophy with an event held this week in Tel Aviv. But first, Inbar Lavi grew up in Israel and in the last few years has been building a successful career in the film industry in Los Angeles, appearing and starring in guest roles in TV and film. She'll be appearing next to Vin Diesel this October in The Last Witch Hunter, and we're happy to have her in the studio today. Thank you very much for being here, Inbar. So, a lot to talk about. Really eager to talk about your career. You've really seemed to hit it big and become very successful over there. But first, we want to talk about The Last Witch Hunter. Besides Vin Diesel, Michael Caine and Elijah Wood. I mean, these are some big names. So what was it like for you in your first major feature film, and what can you tell us about the film? Little tidbits.
Well, it was incredible. I've been waiting to book a film, and for a while now, and it was really exciting to get to work with some of my favorite actors, and Vin was wonderful, Michael Caine was wonderful, and Elijah Wood, is Elijah Wood. So.
Yeah, is he really like that nice in person? He just seems like a really
nice.
down to earth guy.
So kind, so sweet, super funny, silly, and just a cool dude.
Mm-hmm. So what's it about? What can you tell us about the film itself, as much as you can?
Well, it's supernatural. It's about witches, and Vin plays a hunter that's trying to save humanity from an evil witch, and I can't tell you much about it.
Okay, we understand. But was this your first time doing fantasy?
Yeah.
And what was that like?
No. Actually, no.
Oh, was it?
My first film was Tales of an Ancient Empire, and I played Princess Alana, and I got to, ride horses and fight with swords, and that was a fantasy, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And moving to staying kind of with science fiction fantasy, you star in The Last Ship, and you're going to play a recurring role in the second season.
Yes.
So what can you tell us about that?
Well, I play Lieutenant Ravit Bivas. So
Israeli.
Yes, she's Israeli, and I was very excited to play that role because I've played Israeli before, but never this meaty of a role, and I do get to have a beautiful arc throughout the season, and it was important for me to try and portray an Israeli fighter soldier that can bring a lot to the table, that has so many different layers and levels, and can be really tough on the outside, but also very soft and lovely from within.
And I mean, does your Israeli background still play a way in the industry, like perceives you and looks at you, do you think?
My Israeli background?
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't shake it. It's in my blood. It's in my roots. It's everything. It's what, it's who I am.
Is there a typecast?
I'm sure there is. I try to play against any kind of typecast because as an actor, all we can really hope for is to have different masks and to explore different vessels. And hopefully, the more you work, the more you can prove to the audience that you can fall into any kind of mold and make it your own.
So you've also, you've really made it in Hollywood, especially for an Israeli actress, which is, as we know, is not so easy to break through. There are only a handful of Israeli actresses who have really made it. So congratulations. You're one of them. But do you feel that Israelis expect you to represent them in Hollywood and in the film industry?
I don't know if there's an expectation. I think that naturally, by being an Israeli that comes from here and grew up here, I would hope to represent Israel in the best possible way. I try to make smart choices, and I try to make everyone proud and make myself proud. And the way I see it, as long as I'm challenged by my work, the audience will feel challenged to watch my work and will feel excited to see my craft. Right. And that's all I can really do. And
it is really, at the end of the day, all about emotion and about connecting to the work. But you've also guest starred in Sons of Anarchy and Castle, some extremely well-known shows. They air here in Israel as well. So what's the process like auditioning for roles like this?
It depends. For Castle, at that point, it was quite recent, so I didn't really audition for that. There's a lot of roles at this point that casting directors know me and my work, and they've seen my work, and so they go, oh, well, she can do this, and they offer it to me, and and then I get to choose, which is wonderful, and I worked really hard to get to this point, so hopefully it will continue. But for Sons of Anarchy, it's such a big show, and it was such a hit. It was the last season, and everyone wanted to be in the last season of Sons of Anarchy. So I had to come in and audition, and I was actually sick that day. I had the flu and I had a fever, and I almost passed on the audition. But the casting director really, asked for me to come in, and I came in and I gave it my best, and I got it.
And you got it. Even though having the flu and the fever and feeling weak, that's an
maybe
amazing
it worked for the character.
Yeah.
She was feverish.
Yeah. So, I'm just curious to ask before we finish up this interview, would you ever come back to Israel to act in Hebrew, do you think?
I would love to, absolutely. Yeah, of course. There's such great work done here. Just beautiful film, wonderful TV work. I would love that.
So look out, Israel.
Yep.
Well, Inbar Lavi, thank you very much for joining us today. We wish you all the best of luck and enjoy your visit back home.
Thank you.
And moving along, author, poet, and philosopher Henry David Thoreau once stated that night is certainly more novel and less profane than day. And last week, Tel-Aviv became the essence of the novel in a philosophical sense. The theme of the first night of philosophy and arts in Tel-Aviv, violence, an inevitable step for peace. Our reporter David Gonbin and David Yakin stayed up all night to try and find an answer to this question. Here's the first part of their story.
Lebanon, Syria, Iraq. Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. The Middle East is more unstable than ever, and overwhelmed by violence too. So is violence an inevitable step on the road to peace? And is peace itself merely an absence of violence? We are at the first night of the philosophy of Tel Aviv, where we will ask this question to many personalities and philosophers. It is a curious scene that takes place on the newly refurbished promenade. A circle forms, non-Hebrew speakers take headsets for translation. 3 red chairs, 3 intellectuals, the writer A.B. Yoshua, historian Eli Barnavi, and political scientist Denis Sharbit. On the program, how to think of violence. Obviously, the 3 did not agree, but they remained calm. And what emerged from the debate is a fundamental difference between physical violence and verbal abuse.
The violence? What violence? You speak of physical violence or verbal abuse? The task of intellectuals today is to try to limit the verbal violence that we can find everywhere, which is free everywhere. Anyone can now use verbal violence.
Verbal or not, what is violence anyway? It is an essential tool for achieving peace. With his sharp point of view, historian Eli Barnavi should be able to help us.
To say that violence is necessary to achieve peace, I do not think so. I even believe that peace and violence are opposites. This is an oxymoron.
Night has now fallen on the White City. We head towards the Susan Dalal Center, usually the epicenter of Israeli contemporary dance. The only stretching here will be of the neurons. Gerard Ben Susan, professor of philosophy at the University of Strasbourg, an expert on the Messianic time, is hosting a small chat. But when the Messiah comes, will there be more violence or not?
The coming of the Messiah is described in the texts of the Jewish tradition. It is described as introducing a cycle of violence. That is to say that the coming of the Messiah, it will be a period of disasters, historical disasters, violence without end.
Okay, we're not there yet. But meanwhile, while we wait, we want peace, right? So should we fight to achieve it?
This is a difficult question that we cannot ask abstractly. Philosophers sometimes tend to ask a number of questions in abstract ways. Here the issue of violence is absolutely conditional, and I believe we cannot put in an abstract way tension and violence on one side and peace on the other.
It gives food for thought. Meanwhile, another debate began. Among the participants, historian Zev Sternhalt. Often criticized, this veteran is one of the founders of the Peace Now movement. In short, he understands peace quite well.
To reach peace, there is only one way to go: make peace. And we do not make peace by using violence. Peace comes to replace the rule of violence. The state of violence is quite the opposite of what is needed to make peace. To make peace requires that people decide they want to end the violence, and they decide they want to pursue a common existence in a peaceful situation.
And in a moment, we'll return to David Gombian's story. But first, here's our cultural recommendation for the day.
Musicians, filmmakers, poets, and artists, all of them from Mediterranean countries, will be meeting in the same city for 6 days. This is the Ashdod Mediterranean Festival. Every year, this town in southern Israel puts Mediterranean culture in the spotlight. The program includes concerts, screenings, exhibitions. Headliners for this edition include award-winning Spanish musician Javier Limon and Tomatito, and Israeli Idan Reichel and Shlomi Shabbat. The latter will also be accompanied by the Andalus Orchestra in the concert.
And now we return to David Gombian's story about Philosophy Night in Tel Aviv.
To make peace, is the use of violence necessary? To find out, let's leave the Susan Dalal Center and head towards the French Institute. This is the influx of the great days. We are far from the usual apathy of philosophy classes in high school. Omri Bohem came to talk about violence and freedom of speech. This philosopher has a close relationship to the BDS movement, the movement calling for a cultural boycott of Israel. But isn't gagging a culture a form of violence in itself?
I think the boycott is a form of violence. I don't believe all forms of violence are not legitimate. There are types of violence, even physical, which are legitimate. I'll give you an example. Most Israelis think that when Hamas fires rockets at southern Israel, Israel has the right to use violence to defend itself. It is physical violence, and the Palestinians apparently think that to fight the Israeli occupation, they have the right, among other methods, to use violence.
The evening continues fueled by alcohol, tempers flare. Fortunately, philosophy pacifies the mood. Appointment at Rothschild 12 Boulevard, the hotspot of Tel Aviv nightlife. Tonight sees an unusual DJ who's spinning and working the turntables. Ariel Weissman is well known to French viewers, and he's in town for a musical philosophical biathlon. Now let's head for La Cantina. By combining good food and food for thought, Dutch philosopher Nicholas Warren debates the future of philosophy. Off topic a bit, wouldn't you say? You are right. Let's continue our philosophy journey. What does the common man in the street think?
I think that if everyone in the country would change perspectives, agenda, vision of peace, and love, our country would be even more beautiful and attractive.
Ariel Weissman has finished mixing. Now he pauses for reflection on the topic of fatigue. In fact, aren't we tired of violence?
Today it's barbarism. We are back to a medieval state, which is rather a medieval time of the spirit. That is to say that we are in a period in which we have learned to think, but we don't know enough. So this is the expression of a born desire, but most of all of frustration.
There is no doubt that Philosophy Night is cool. The problem is that once the morning comes, we do not always remember everything. But even philosopher David Hume was not sure that the sun would rise in the morning. But we are witnessing in Tel Aviv a new morning and a new day which has just begun.
And that wraps up today's show. Be sure over the weekend to stay tuned for the best of culture on I-24 News. And of course, join us next week for the latest in arts and entertainment. For anything you may have missed, you can check our website, i24news.tv. You can also find us on Facebook and on Twitter. Now, we leave you today with the music of Boubacar Traoré, a renowned singer, songwriter, and guitarist from Mali. He constantly tours around the world and is considered to be one of the greatest living African bluesmen. Thank you for watching and enjoy.